The peace of Christ be with you. This is the Midweek Reflection for Third Reformed on May 27, 2020. Over these past couple of months, it has been really hard to imagine that anything could cut through the noise of this pandemic. Despite significant world events and being in a presidential election year, all of the focus on news and in media has been on the virus, the response to it, and the impact it's had on our communities. But over the last week or so, an old conversation has resurfaced and captured the attention and energy of many of us, and that's the conversation of race in America, and in particular how black people, and black men especially, are perceived and treated within our society. I've always known that that's a challenging conversation to have, but I learned it in a profound way a few years back when I was serving the Reformed Church in America, the family of churches that Third's a part of. I spent 4 years on the General Synod Council, the GSC, which is the board for the denomination. And for 2 of those 4 years, I represented GSC on the White Privilege Task Force. This was a working group that was pulled together to look at historic racialized patterns and systems and how they continue to impact the life of the church, and to offer some concrete steps towards healing. And that was a great experience for me. Of that 12-person task force, I was the only white man on it. It was humbling, insightful, and gave me some relationships that I cherish to this day with people I deeply respect. When I think back on that time, I think to my very first General Synod, the big summer gathering for the Reformed Church, and how my name tag said, my name, and then underneath it, North Grand Rapids Classis. And at the lunch table or over coffee between sessions, strangers would come up, glance at my name tag, and strike up a conversation about the Grand Rapids area and their ties to it, or maybe people I know that they know and loved. The next 2 years, my name tag said General Synod Council. And then I had no shortage of conversations as strangers would come up and glance at the name tag and immediately start asking if maybe I had some behind the curtains information, or, passionately sharing their perspective to make sure it was represented at the GSC table. And then came the year that, for whatever reason, in the way they put together name tags, instead of saying General Synod Council, I had one that said White Privilege Task Force. And all of a sudden, the lunch table and the coffee station got to be a lot lonelier of a place. I still had my friends, colleagues I knew, people I'd gone to seminary with, so I was not alone. But all of those stranger interactions, where people are normally just mingling, making connections, almost evaporated as I could see strangers walk up, glance at my name tag, and literally turn and walk in the other direction. As I was on that task force and spoke on its behalf at General Synod assemblies, it became really apparent to me how hard it is to have an honest and vulnerable dialogue around race in America. So while I'm really grateful for that experience, it certainly helped me learn that if you want to feel alone in a crowd, show up wearing this name tag to a denominational gathering with a supermajority of white people. And I think part of what I learned in that experience was that it can be hard to talk about things like white privilege without getting really defensive and interpreting that to mean that you as a white person are a racist, or that you as a white person have never had to overcome adversity or challenges or biases against you in your pathway to success and stability in life. And it can be really hard to hear about the systemic patterns of overuse of violence and death of black men in police interactions without interpreting that to mean that all police are racist, or that we can't affirm that blue lives matter. So let's get that stuff out of the way right out of the gate. Of course, all of us, as we make our way through this life, are faced with adversity. And some of you white people, have had significant adversity to overcome along the way, especially if you come out of situations of poverty or abuse and neglect or trauma. There have been significant hurdles you've had to get over and mountains you've had to climb to earn what you have in this life. What white privilege does mean, though, is that we can acknowledge that our country was born with racism baked into the DNA, that not just practically, but legally, in the framing of the Constitution, dark-skinned people were 3/5 humans at best, and for a long period of time were acceptable forms of commodity to be traded, bought, sold, owned, used. That's a part of our history that we cannot deny, and it's a legacy that we've had to work to overcome ever since. So it means that in the history of our great nation, there has been a preference for whiteness from its origin, and that those of us who are white have benefited from that. Part of that benefit is that we have not often had to think about how our racial identity impacts our situation in life most of the time. And we can look at those troubling patterns with police interaction and still be able to wholeheartedly affirm that blue lives matter as well as black lives matter. In fact, most of the police officers, I'll say every police officer that I personally know, cares deeply about serving the common good. They get up in the morning and put on a bulletproof vest and say goodbye to their families, not knowing what they're going to be faced with in the day to come. And yet they willingly step into harm's way to try to serve and protect all people. They talk to me about painstaking ethical decisions that have to be made in a split second. And that is a pressure that most of us have never experienced and cannot fully understand. So I want to make sure that is said right out of the gate. And yet we cannot turn our eyes away from videos like Ahmaud Arbery being barricaded and shot in the middle of the street, or of Christian Cooper asking a dog walker to put her dog on a leash in compliance with the local law and having the police called and informed that an African American man is threatening her life. We can't see George Floyd in Minneapolis literally die before our eyes under the weight of a police officer's knees on his neck and turn away from that. Those videos are painful, heart-wrenching, so hard to watch. And yet it is so important that we give our attention to it, especially as white people in America. Because without accountability, systems never change. So for all of the hang-ups I have around our over-reliance on technology and the addiction to technology that many of us are living with, one of the positive things maybe that has occurred with everybody walking around with a video camera in their pocket is that some of these things that communities of color have been talking about and have known personally for decades are now put in front of us in a way that is not easy to explain away. We are having to deal with the reality that many people are living with in this nation. As I've said throughout this reflection today, these are really hard conversations to have without immediately becoming defensive. But they are incredibly important ones to have, and ones that those of us who have not had that personal experience need to take the lead on. We cannot be content with the way things are. So in the description for this video today, I'm going to include a couple of links to what I believe are good starting points, helpful resources, if you are willing to begin thinking a little bit more deeply about why things are the way they are, and how your personal attitudes, conversations, and ways of showing up can be a part of that solution. And as always, I would encourage you to add your voice to the conversation. If you have any insights about why these are such hard conversations for you to have, or maybe some tools that you found along the way to help you reframe the way you think about it and interact, please join in this conversation and keep reaching out to me in the weeks and months and years to come as we work together for a healthier and more whole America for all of our neighbors.